Okay, Bill Beaumont has been re-elected World Rugby Chairman. He defeated Augustin Pichot 28 votes to 23 for his second term. Now, Bernard Laporte will be his deputy, replacing Augustin Pichot, who was Bill Beaumont's deputy leading into this election. And yeah, it's going to be a very interesting 4 years. Bill Beaumont's 68, so he'll be 72 at the time of the next World Rugby election for head of the organisation. So bear that in mind, his age as well. Pichot was arguing for some radical change and some pretty obvious changes to rugby. He did actually argue that the top end talent is overpaid compared to other professionals, and that therefore makes professionalism very unsustainable financially in certain locations. And we're seeing that in Super Rugby. We're seeing massive financial problems in Super Rugby. And ironically, the Southern Hemisphere nations backs Pichot alongside Uruguay. Uruguay being a second-tier Southern Hemisphere nation, alongside Argentina, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. They backed Pichot. The Pacific Islands, I'm surprised, actually went with Beaumont. Bill Beaumont got a lot of Pacific Island nation votes, which is really, really surprising. Also, the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere divide is a problem going forward for the unity of the game. It's world rugby, but it's splitting down the middle, with the Southern Hemisphere wanting to go one direction and the Northern Hemisphere a completely different direction. Now, we know there's financial problems. You look at the Welsh Union, you look at the Scottish Union, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Crowd numbers aren't great at club level. Super Rugby is in big trouble. The Welsh clubs are financially all over the place in the Pro 14. The Scottish and Welsh unions have had to furlough all players and staff on centralised contracts. They've been, and their clubs have furloughed all players and staff during this current crisis. So money is a massive problem. Even before this coronavirus lockdown kicked in, there were concerns about, you know, the income and outgoing of rugby union when it comes to money. The voting system as well definitely needs reform. That's something that Pichot was arguing for, was a voting system reform when it comes to these kind of administrative elections in World Rugby. The Six Nations, for example, and the Rugby Championship nations get 3 votes each. Other nations or nation blocks get 2 votes, and individual nations get 1. So Uruguay had 1 vote, whereas Argentina, their neighbour, gets 3. That's a flawed system. And we can all look at FIFA, a sister organisation in a different sport, and how, you know, unrepresentative FIFA is and how bloated and corrupt that organisation is. Well, rugby has a really weird voting system where it actually protects the old guard and doesn't allow the new guard a say, really. We've seen countries like the US and Uruguay and Brazil and Canada and Japan and the Pacific Island nations, a lot of them have massively improved. Canada not so much, but the other nations have really stepped up and have shown that they can compete with Tier 1 nations and beat Tier 1 nations. It's a fact. The problem is the voting system is rigged against them. When they're these are the nations calling for change, their vote means less. So that's something that needs to be considered. Money side of things, Pichot was arguing that top-end talent needs to take a slight pay reduction, so the wider talent pool, the wider playing pool, can actually have higher average wages, so professionalism can work in the short to medium term until the game can become more profitable. He was arguing that. So that's something that's on the table, is player wages and finances of the game. That's something Bill Beaumont is going to have to seriously look at. And international selection rules. That's something that Bill Beaumont wants to change. He wants to allow those with dual nationality who played for one nation, for example, to go back and play for the other nation that they have nationality for. It makes a mockery of the international selection rules then. It turns it into rugby league, which has got problems at international level, where a player can represent multiple nations in their career, depending on who needs them the most. That's something else that needs seriously looking at. But he did that to carry favour with the Pacific Island nations especially, and they voted for him, which I find really surprising, as they are really being hammered under the current system with losing players to New Zealand, the Six Nation bloc, Australia. They are losing players. Some of their best talent is going out of the Pacific Island nations to New Zealand, to Australia, and then to the Six Nations and the US and Canadian teams. They are bleeding talent. Australia, as a rugby nation, is in a mess on an administrative level. Again, bleeding talent to other leagues, where again the residency rule kicks in, and then they can represent Canada, the US, one of the Six Nations. Another problem. They're bleeding talent. So if you don't have a strong Australia, the Bledisloe Cup between Australia and New Zealand becomes pointless because New Zealand will win 9 times out of 10. It's not really a competition. Question marks over the test schedule. It's another thing that Bill Beaumont's got on his plate. There's a lot on his plate. And then on top of that, you've got the coronavirus. And the shutdown is showing how the finances are really precarious, even in good times. We're seeing the Welsh and Scottish unions furloughing players and staff, even at club level. We know the Welsh game at club level is in a mess. New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and Argentina, they're kicking out the Sunwolves out of Super Rugby. They're the ones who have the best average crowds. Crowd attendance in Super Rugby is a problem. Finances in Super Rugby is a massive concern. So while the election's done and dusted, a lot of questions remain, and Pichot was arguing for a lot of changes in a lot of these areas. And Bill Beaumont is more status quo, carry on as normal with a few tweaks. Rugby needs to make a decision in the next 4 years. Carry on the current path, which could lead to further catastrophic consequences. It may pan out. It could pan out, but finance is a massive problem. Or should they have gone with Pichot's a bit more radical solutions to overhaul the game? Because I can see a situation where we end up in a FIFA situation down the line, 5, 10, 20 years, where a World Cup gets awarded to a country that shouldn't get it. A Qatar situation. And that's something that I think rugby would never recover from if it did that. It doesn't have the finance behind it compared to football. And it doesn't necessarily have the global reach that football does professionally either. If they were to award a World Cup to a nation that had some dubious reasons for getting it, questions would be asked massively, and you know, I think we could end up in that situation because we're going with the same as before. And Bernard Laporte is now his deputy, someone who isn't very radical when it comes to thinking outside the box, when it comes to administration. Bernard Laporte, again, part of the old guard. So we'll have to see what happens, but the division is there between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and the voting shows that massive divide, which could end up splitting the game. But there we go, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts below, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.